For as long as I've been driving and writing and talking about electric vehicles, I've heard and said many, many times that EVs don't require as intensive or indeed as frequent trips to your local mechanic or dealership for regular maintenance compared to ICE vehicles. In fact, unlike internal combustion engine cars with their large numbers of moving parts, EVs are known for being far less mechanically complex. Electric motors are, after all, far less complicated in their design than an ICE engine. They tend to operate at much lower temperatures, and while they do operate within some pretty tight tolerances, can happily operate for hundreds of thousands of miles with no problems at all. The fact is often used by EV advocates to justify why they don't visit the dealership for regular service appointments, and has even led to some EV owners accusing dealerships and automakers of trying to take advantage of unsuspecting new-to-EV owners' naivete on the subject to bank some extra coin. But do you really need to take your EV to be serviced? Can you operate your EV for years without setting a tyre into a maintenance bay? And are you really being taken for a ride when automakers and dealerships suggest you need to make more frequent trips to check on everything? Let's find out. Nobody likes spending money unnecessarily, especially when it's ostensibly just for the purpose of checking that something you own or use regularly is still working, while, as far as you can tell, it is actively still working. And let's face it, service and maintenance contracts can often feel like you're throwing your hard-earned money away just to satisfy some arbitrary requirement of the system. For me, living in a rural part of Oregon, for example, I hate the fact that I have to spend well over $1,000 a year to have someone regularly visit my house to make sure our septic system is working and not about to pollute the local waterway. I hate it even more when those visits don't include more than a cursory cleaning and a check, and when something does actually happen, as it did recently when a float got stuck in the upward position, I had to pay several $100s to have someone come out and figure what was broken. Or in my case, just misplaced. And I'm sure, regardless of your housing situation or your bank balance, you have similar irksome costs that zap money out of your bank account when you least expect it. That's doubly frustrating when you find you need to pay money on servicing something that doesn't really appear to need it, something that's been working just fine, and something that you don't have the time or energy to seemingly needlessly have checked out. And for many EV owners, that's exactly how they feel about EVs and scheduled maintenance. Look in any owner's manual for any modern EV, and the service intervals suggested always seem to be somewhat arbitrary and suspiciously similar to service maintenance intervals for internal combustion engine vehicles. But instead of your service schedule listing things like an oil and filter change, a spark plug check, and a 100-point inspection, many EV service schedules list one or maybe two things. So today I'm going to ask if it's worth getting your EV serviced at all, point out some things you should bear in mind when deciding to or not go for a service, and give you some advice as to what to look out for and what to avoid when picking a dealership to work on your EV. But first, let's talk about the standard run-of-the-mill EV service for the overwhelming majority of EVs on the road today, at least for those in their first few years of service. Because while we like to think about EVs as not needing any maintenance at all because they don't have a massively complex metal block that harnesses tiny explosions, they do have things like suspension, steering, and brakes, all of which do eventually need maintenance. But they also have things like air conditioning and battery pack cooling and cabin filters, which, like the rest of the stuff I've just listed, will need eventual maintenance. I'll come to those in a moment, but first, let's look at what a standard EV service looks like for the first few years of ownership for the majority of folk. You'll get a visual inspection, and you will get your tyres rotated. And that's it. And that will quite often take less time than it probably took you to drive to the dealership in the first place, with very little to show for it. Depending on the quality of your dealership, the experience might be a pleasant one that's appropriately priced, or a complete nightmare. While I have seen some shonky dealerships interpret the visual inspection as little more than glancing over to make sure the object you drove in is actually a car with wheels, most dealerships will put your vehicle up on some kind of a lift, take a peek underneath for any obvious signs of damage or wear, and then rotate your tyres before sending your car back out into the big bad world. Some really good dealerships will do more than just a cursory check, but it really depends on how much time the dealership is investing in keeping you, the customer, happy. Depending on the vehicle you have, which company it was made by, and what your local dealership is actually like, you may find your first few visits are in fact complimentary. In fact, some automakers now offer 2 to 3 years or a certain number of miles or kilometres of free services before you have to reach for your credit card in an attempt to try and encourage EV owners who very quickly learn that service appointments are a bit pointless in early days to get into that habit of visiting dealerships more frequently. Other dealerships will charge you as much as a comparably sized ICE vehicle, often falling back on the, "Oh, we just have one set service fee for all vehicles," or making similar arguments to explain why your 5-minute visit is the same price as the amount of money being paid for the service visit for the massive V8 in Bay 12 that's been there for 2 whole hours. And, as you might expect, this kind of dealership usually has the opposite effect on their EV-owning customers, which, given how allergic some dealerships are to EVs, might actually be intentional. Anyway, I have already pointed out that EVs don't really need a massive amount of servicing in their first few years of ownership, at least when you compare them to a gasoline vehicle. So I'm guessing that you might think this video is going to end here. Except, well, service appointments do have a purpose, and I am someone who personally advocates for sensible service intervals as opposed to none. Why? Well, as with most things in the world, from our homes to ourselves, it's a good idea to ensure we stay up to date with planned maintenance. In most normal countries around the world, ones that don't have an anti-vaxxer with a dead brainworm in charge of governmental health policy, or in fact an entire healthcare insurance system designed to make the 1% even richer, all while denying cancer patients the essential care they need to progress towards remission, it's generally suggested that you visit your doctor at least once a year for a physical checkup to, make sure everything is working as it should. Speaking as someone with immense privilege, that is, someone whose spouse has decent enough healthcare through her work that I am able to have an annual physical, I can say regular checkups, even when I'm feeling fine, have helped me head off far more serious issues before they became massive problems. Without an annual physical, for example, I wouldn't have known my blood work was dramatically going off the rails in 2020, and I wouldn't have been in a position to make the significant changes to my lifestyle that have helped prevent far worse. I also wouldn't be in such a good place with managing my long QT syndrome, which is an inherited genetic heart condition that can be fatal. In my case, in much of my immediate family, the condition appears linked to a specific string of protein deletions, forming a variant of unknown significance that could point to a possibly previously unknown LQTS type. Sure, being on medication sucks, as does this little badge, and it all saps my energy and pegs my maximum heart rate, which makes working out a challenge, but I am alive, and that's thanks to regular medical appointments. And just like us, the same is true for your car. Regular maintenance visits aren't fun, especially if you have to pay for them, but they can help prevent more expensive problems from becoming a massive headache further down the road. And while it can be an absolute pain in the butt to have to spend extra money on something that doesn't look like it's worth the visit, if your EV is under warranty, trying to get at least one visit a year, or more frequently if you are a road warrior, can make a lot of sense. Why? Well, If there is a warranty problem, proving your car has been regularly seen by the dealership should help avoid any questions over delayed maintenance or attempted blame shifting. And just like hidden health conditions, service visits can help highlight problems with your vehicle before they become candidates for the newest episode of Just Rolled In. And I'm not saying for a moment that all dealerships have attentive or indeed well-trained staff, because they don't. But if you're someone who has done your research into which dealerships actually have engaged, trained EV techs on staff who are on the ball, regular visits can help better identify and diagnose any problems. Since automakers are generally not required to issue recall notices for things that may fall into the "this is a pain" category as opposed to the "people will die if this isn't fixed immediately" classification, many irksome problems with EVs are still dealt with using service bulletins. And these are the kind of things that any good dealership tech should know about and be willing to check vehicles against before they become massive headaches. Of course, it would be deceptive of me to let you think that all techs are good at their jobs and attentive and willing to go the extra mile, because in my experience, quite a few are not. But with a little legwork, you can find out which dealerships have good EV reputations and good EV service staff. Local owners groups and vehicle-specific forums online have helped many an EV owner find a good tech to work with, and it can really be the difference between having a healthy, happy EV or one that's been badly treated by a dealership who would just rather you sold the damn thing and purchased an Explorer instead. You might think by now that I'm some paid industry insider advocating for needless service appointments. But believe me, if I were, we'd have a physical studio that wasn't my home's spare bedroom. I don't like unnecessary service visits any more than anyone else, nor do I like spending my money. But the smart choice is somewhere in between. Start off by looking at your EV manufacturer recommended service interval. As I've already said, I'd suggest you get at least one visit a year in if you drive a normal amount, and maybe a little more if you drive a lot. But in all honesty, knowing what's due and when also helps you figure out if that next service appointment is one that must be met, or one you can probably skip. If you're someone who knows how to keep an eye on things like brake fluid, knows what to look for when it comes to uneven tyre wear, and perhaps is okay with rotating your tyres, you likely don't need to follow a particularly strict service schedule. But for what it's worth, I actually have this. It's a tyre learning tool that I use to enable me to relearn the wheel positions, which means I can rotate my car's tyres without ever visiting a tyre shop or a dealership. Tools like OBD2 to smartphone adapters also let you check for any latched error codes, which again can help you figure out if your EV is in need of a service visit or not. And if you're going to do regular things like cabin filter changes and tyre swaps, do make sure you follow the recommended procedures in the owner's manual. And of course, if you're going to use non-recommended parts, double check for compatibility. For example, we don't use OEM cabin filters in either of our EVs. Instead, we use these Bosch-branded HEPA filters. Supposedly, they do a better job of filtering the air, and I've had no complaints through multiple forest fire seasons. We also keep each of our car's versions in the closet for emergency use. That said, if all of what I've just said sounds like it's something that would get you into a fluster, you probably do want the peace of mind of a more regular service schedule, at least until well after your car's warranty period has expired. When you have to pay to replace things out of pocket, most people tend towards a more lax schedule, and as long as your brakes and tyres work, the steering and suspension isn't doing things they shouldn't, and your car isn't showing any nasty error warnings, you are probably good with a once-yearly checkup. But that is my personal opinion, and look, I am just some random dudette on the internet, so don't sue me. What I do absolutely advocate for, however, is not letting your problems fester. For example, Kate, if your car's air conditioning is misbehaving, get it to the dealership quickly. On EVs, air conditioning isn't just for your cabin, it can also keep your battery pack healthy, so don't delay if your AC starts blowing tepid air when you're expecting cold. As I have learned in the past, compressor failures can and do happen, and as Kate is experiencing right now, a video incoming in about a month's time, other parts of your EV's air conditioning system can and do fail, which can be costly. And knowing a good local dealership you have a good relationship with is a great way to ensure those sudden problems get dealt with quickly and properly, which again is why I generally recommend at least a once-a-year checkup for your EV. Finally, I want to clear up some things that people often claim about EV servicing that aren't actually true. First, EVs do absolutely have gearboxes, and yes, they also require oil changes, just not as frequently as internal combustion engine car engines or, in fact, their transmissions. Most, but not all EVs have reduction gearboxes that use some kind of oil in them to lubricate their single ratio gear arrangements. Very often, though, the oil is very different from any kind of oil used in internal combustion engine vehicles, and it is vitally important to follow the manufacturer requirements for oil composition and weight. Most EV gearboxes can go for more than 100,000 miles or more before this is something you'll need to think about, but some have a lower service interval. My Vectrex VX1's oil change interval is in fact far less. It has a planetary gearbox that takes power from the motor and sends it to the wheels, and I have to keep it happy and the seal in good condition, or my bike spurts oil everywhere. Ask me how I know. Second, EV brakes do require maintenance. They have brake components that can and do wear and fail, and you have to make sure that they stay in good working order if you need to stop in a hurry. Brake systems usually have hydraulic fluid that will eventually require replenishing, although how frequently you'll need to do that will depend on your vehicle, the weather where you live, and how you drive. Finally, you absolutely should check under the hood of your EV every single week, just like you would with a gasoline vehicle. This is to make sure all the fluids are where they should be, and some EVs do require cooling fluid of some description, either for the motor, the battery pack, or power electronics, or in fact, all of it. I should also add that if you're not aware, rodents really like sneaking up into nice, warm, quiet areas under the hood of an EV, where they will proceed to make a nest, pee over everything, and nom their way through any cables if left undisturbed. Or worse. In short then, servicing an EV is a requirement just like it is for an ICE vehicle, but because there are fewer moving components and the temperatures involved have less extreme variations, you're much less likely to need a frequent service. When you buy a new EV, make yourself familiar with the service schedule because it will help you figure out when your service is needed and not, as many people complain, your local dealership decides you need one. Because speaking from my own experience, many dealership systems still think that EVs require that 5,000-mile oil change, which I can tell you is most certainly not true. Thanks for joining us today, and if you've got thoughts, make sure you leave them in our Discord room, on our Patreon page down below, or you can reach out to us on Mastodon or Blue Sky. Thanks to the amazing list of people scrolling by on your screen right now. They're part of the massive community of supporters who make this channel possible, helping us through Patreon and YouTube, covering our bills, paying our team, and helping us to remain 100% independent. If you'd like to join them and see your name listed here, just follow the links below. We've got options available across a wide range of different price points, starting from $1.50 US a month. A massive welcome to our newest supporters: Jason Bodor, Brian Newton, Mark, Chris London, Shelley, Joshua Hemphill, Andrew Miller II, Eric Miller, Barry 2379, Wayne Rendler, Chad Johnson, L. Randolph Lee, Monica Turner, RB Singh, PG9, MK Duffer, Robin Holston, James Hollyrod, Kristen Rasmussen, BGB The Bun, Stephen Meadows, Simon Cottle, Randolph Lee, Philip Paul, Mia Hartman, Scott Matheson, John Snyder, Abelardo Conessa, Calvin Klein, HB, Triple Steffel, Jim Boyer, Jay, Rastas, Mike, Jason Hellman, Abigail, Lynn Mogren, Julian Pipe, Roche Liu, Lam Nok, and Peter Coughlin. To join the list and get your shout out, become a paid Patreon member for your moment of fame, and you can even give membership to someone else. If you'd like to support us with a one-off donation, you'll find links below to make Ko-fi and Bitcoin donations, and we even have an old-fashioned PO box you can reach us at. You'll also find links to our swag store, and if you're someone who has to shop on Amazon, please consider using our affiliate link so we get the commission, not Jeff Bezos. So we can continue to focus on making our content even better and reduce burnout, we're being a little freer with our release days, but plan on dropping new content every Tuesday, Thursday and Saturday on our main channel, plus something on Sunday over on Transport Evolved Take 2. If you want more, the mighty algorithm that hates us thinks you should be watching this video, but we think this one is one you should check out. Be awesome, be kind, be intentional, and don't forget to resist. Keep evolving!